So, welcome. This is chapter 5, photosynthesis, and we're going to go in detail for how plants make food and the electron transit upon lost time. So that's what we're going to do. To complicated if you have not seen photosynthesis or have not read about it or didn't read the chapter. If you get confused after this and you might need more help, go watch some YouTube videos. I think there's a good one on Crash Course. So that one, I didn't see any video on the Amoeba Sisters one. So maybe go check that out. And also read the chapter and do your homework. Especially if you haven't taken any science class before, it might be a little bit difficult for you to understand the photosynthesis. So as we know, life depends on photosynthesis. So the way we define photosynthesis is converting sunlight into food. So plants, they take sunlight, they break it, they use that as energy, and we're gonna look at the process today in detail, and they convert it into food. Some other organisms like some protista, amoeba, euglena, they can also do photosynthesis. So it's not only plants, some of the other organisms can do photosynthesis as well. The ingredients that we need for photosynthesis is sunlight, carbon dioxide, we breathe that out, and water that plants get from their roots that has minerals in it. So that's what you need for photosynthesis. So this equation here, you've seen this before briefly last time. This is the equation for photosynthesis. We said you need carbon dioxide that we've been breathing out, and then water the plants get from their roots, light energy from the sun, and this is what they produce: glucose and oxygen as a byproduct. This is the formula for glucose. You need to know this. There will be a question on the exam where I ask you the equation for photosynthesis, and then I ask you the chemical formula for glucose. So commit this to your memory, take a screenshot, write it in your notes. This is how much chemistry you have to know. This is the equation that you have to know. This is the photosynthesis equation. Where does this take place? When we talked about the organelles, we looked at an organelle called chloroplast. So chloroplast is where this is happening. This is where plants are taking carbon dioxide and water and using light energy to power up their photosynthesis system, and then producing sugar and oxygen as a byproduct. So it's happening in the chloroplast. A question, so being able to carry out photosynthesis is evolutionary advantage for organisms because it allows them to do what? So what is the answer? Everybody's saying E. Now, A is true. They do produce oxygen as a byproduct. B is true. They make their own food through this process. C is not true. Plants, they are not selfless. They're not making food for other, other animals to eat. So they're making the food for themselves. Even when there's no sun at night, they store that sugar so they can use it later. So this is not true. So it can be all of the above. So mainly it's to make their own food. The way evolution solved this problem is through photosynthesis, so they can make their own food. So the answer would be B here. Fruits and nectars, Chris said, that is true, and that's for pollination. So when we get to that, it's defined as a mutualistic relationship. So if they're producing nectar for birds, they want the birds or the bees to do the pollination. So they're trying to attract pollinators by doing that. So without photosynthesis, neither the plants nor the animals in this image would survive. So plants, they do photosynthesis. They take sunlight, they convert it into food, glucose here. And then these animals came around and started eating the plants. And that's how they get their energy. But they do it through the process called cellular respiration. Plants are doing photosynthesis, and then the animals that are eating that food are doing cellular respiration. Now, sometimes students get confused thinking the plants only do photosynthesis. Plants do both. They do photosynthesis and they do cellular respiration. They do both. They use sunlight to make ATP, then they use that ATP to make sugars. So that's cellular respiration. So if you were to take this equation and write it backwards, that's cellular respiration equation. You have glucose and oxygen, and if you just write it this way, and that's the cellular respiration, which is next chapter, we're gonna look at that as well. So this is just to give you an overview of that. Photosynthesis is essential to sustaining life on Earth. So when the planet Earth formed, there was no oxygen there, and cyanobacteria came around and it started producing oxygen as a byproduct. So that's when first mass extinction happened, because the organisms that were around before oxygen came around didn't use oxygen, and oxygen was very harmful to them. And then they went extinct, and then we came around, we used oxygen. So it's essential for life on Earth. We use oxygen, and oxygen is the byproduct of photosynthesis. Next thing we have is light and the wavelengths. So if you were to take white light and you were to put it through a crystal or a prism, you're gonna see all these colors. So white light has all these colors. So the sun releases energy, photons, in waves. Here, this is in nanometers wavelength. Nanometer is 1 divided by 1 billion, so 9 zeros there. If it's 400 nanometer, the wavelength, it's violet, and you're gonna see these waves, they're very small. So these waves are very small compared to this wave here. These waves are longer. Shorter wavelength, they have a higher energy than the longer wavelength. You guys heard about how UV can cause cancer, skin cancer. So this is violet. Ultraviolet is going to be up here around 350. So that's what can cause cancer. It's high in energy and it can cause skin cancer. So that's where the name is coming from as well. So this is violet, ultraviolet is up here. So again, these photons are released and release energy in waves. Shorter wavelengths have high energy compared to this red that has a longer wavelength. We cannot see UV light, but some of the animals can. So let's see. So this is what flower looks like to us, and this is what it looks like to the bees, because they can see UV. Some of the fish species, they have extra cones in their eyes. They can also see UV, and I think deer can also see UV. We cannot see UV, but there are some people who can. Just like sometimes, someone is colorblind. Sometimes they are born with, missing some cones in their eyes, so they're colorblind. But sometimes they're born with some extra cones that allows them to see UV. So some people with a mutation can see UV light. So this is what UV, and it looks like under UV light. This is what it looks like normally. So only some wavelengths reach Earth. Sun is very, very far away. So some wavelengths reach Earth, and some of them are visible to us. And we see these wavelengths as colors. So plant pigments, and the pigment specifically are known as chlorophylls. They're going to capture the visible light. So another thing I want to mention, actually, I want to ask you guys first, do you guys know why leaves look green? Why they have a green color?
Chlorophyll.
Chlorophyll. So all these wavelengths are hitting the plants basically. And what's getting reflected is the color that it looks like. So it's reflecting green. It's observing all other wavelengths and it's reflecting green. So that's why it looks green. Now focus on that a little bit more. But the color that gets reflected is what our eyes perceive as a color. So that's green. So here we have some photosynthetic pigments, and these are very efficient ones. There are a lot more, but we're only mentioning 3: chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, carotenoids. This is gonna ask you to understand absorption and reflection. So I said the wavelengths, the ones that get reflected, what color it's going to look like. So here we have wavelength in nanometers. What you notice on this graph, sunlight is hitting the leaf, all the colors are being observed except green. On this graph, you notice there is a curve here, there's a curve here. Then you look at green here, it's flat. It's not being observed. So it's not being observed, it's being reflected. Because there's a curve here, there's a curve here. This is telling us plants, they mostly observe blue light, dark blue, violet light, and then red light here. This is what they mostly observe. If you guys were in the lab today, we would have done this experiment where you guys, put some plants under different lights and then they measure the amount of photosynthesis. Light. So since we know that plants, now we know this, mostly observe blue light and red light. This is how they started making the plant lights now. So red and blue, because they're only mostly going to observe these 2 lights. Old school, they had just a white light. So they just had a white light. It wasn't, red or blue. And that's what they used. But nowadays, since we know this, they mostly use blue and red light. So I can't see another photo that's showing you that. But yeah, that's what they use mostly now. Because those are the ones that get reflected and this is what's getting observed. This is what's not getting observed basically. So mostly this is done through carotenoids. Then we have something that's called carotenoids. You notice in the fall, leaves, they look yellow or orange. So fall colors. So this is what you notice, reddish, orangish, or yellow. That's coming from these carotenoids. So what's happening? Plants, when they start losing their leaves, they think, oh, I spent a lot of energy making this chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, but that's why the plant leaves looked green. And now I'm losing those leaves. So what it's gonna do, it's gonna absorb this chlorophyll A and B back into the trunk so it can use it when it makes new leaves. When that's done, these carotenoids, that's what's left there, and that does not, so the colors that it reflects is yellowish and orangish. So that's why they start looking yellow and orange. It's coming from these carotenoids. Chlorophyll A and B make it look green, carotenoids make it look reddish, yellow, or orangish. So that's where the colors are coming from. Another experiment that we would have done in the lab today is to measure the amount of photosynthesis that's happening. And we usually use this plant called Elodia or Elodia. So the way this experiment is done, this plant grows underwater. And We know from the equation of the photosynthesis that oxygen is produced as a byproduct. If you put this plant under, let's say, white light, that's your control, and then you're gonna notice it's making some bubbles. That's the oxygen. It's doing photosynthesis. Then you're gonna take maybe another lamp and it's gonna have green light. You're gonna put it under there, and red light, put it under there, and maybe blue light. And then you wanna see which of these did the most photosynthesis. So what you can do, you can take this and you can flip it like this. So you can flip it like this, and then you can measure the amount of gas produced depending on under which light it is. So that's the experiment that we would have done in the lab today. But this is how you can measure the amount of photosynthesis. Any questions so far on the lecture? Give me thumbs up if no questions. Yes, okay. So this is just a review. No pigment absorbs green light. So that's why the curve is flat here. And green light is reflected. That's why we see it as green color. Our eyes perceive it as green. Only observed light is useful for photosynthesis. Again, that's why we are giving the plant lights either red or blue, because they're only going to observe those ones mostly.